Hi everyone! Before we get into this audiobook, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me out a lot as well as contributes a lot to the channel. Now, let's get into the story. I hope you enjoy. The air, thick with the cloying sweetness of pine and the bitter tang of approaching doom, clung to Elara. Chilled to the marrow despite the day, she knelt on the roughly hewn platform, the coarse linen of her shift offering little defense against the encroaching cold. The clearing, typically a haven of bustling woodland activity, felt stifled, muted, holding its breath in morbid anticipation. A sea of faces blurred before her, an ocean of condemnation and dread reflecting the sun's waning ember. Her gaze snagged on a knot in the executioner's block, the wood's intricate swirl mirroring the tumultuous storm that had become her life. Her parents' alleged treachery, accusations of treason, whispers of alliances with outlawed wolves, the charges enough to damn them both. And now, she was to pay for their supposed sins. Every plea, every desperate offer to stand as hostage, had crashed against the wall of the pack's collective anguish and fury. She, a swimmer overwhelmed by a raging current. Borak, the executioner, a mountain of muscle and grim purpose, rasped his thumb along the axe's honed edge. The metallic scrape vibrated through Elara, an external manifestation of the terror gnawing at her core. Closing her eyes, she conjured her mother's kind smile, her father's protective embrace. Both now gone, consumed by the earth from which they came soon, she would join them. "Any last words, Elara Meadowsweet?" Borak's voice, a dry, grating rumble, held no solace. She attempted to swallow, her throat a desert. A carefully constructed speech, a fervent defense of her family's honor, now rang false, insignificant beneath the sentence's crushing weight. Instead, she exhaled a single word, a fragile whisper carried on the breeze. "Forgive." Borak snorted, unmoved. He hoisted the axe, its polished surface catching the last rays of light. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, amplifying the already oppressive silence. Elara braced herself, conjuring the memory of warm sun on her skin, the fragrant kiss of wildflowers in her hair. She would meet death with dignity, a final, quiet rebellion against the injustice that had stolen her future. The axe descended, a flash of silver against the darkening canvas of twilight. Elara squeezed her eyes shut, awaiting the blow. But it never landed. A bestial roar ripped through the stillness, a primordial sound that resonated deep within her very bones. The earth trembled, and a savage wind tore through the clearing, scattering debris and dust. She dared to open her eyes. Standing between her and Borak was a figure of immense power, radiating an almost palpable energy. Riven Blackwood, alpha of the Blackwood pack. His eyes, normally pools of dark amber, burned with a fierce, predatory glow. Halt. The single word, a command, silenced all dissent. Borak froze, the axe suspended in its arc. The crowd murmured, their fear now laced with a heady mix of bewilderment and awe. Riven turned to face the executioner, his gaze unwavering, unforgiving. "By what sanction do you shed blood on Blackwood soil?" Despite his imposing stature, Borak seemed to shrink under the Alpha's scrutiny. "Alpha, she stands condemned. Her parents, their transgressions are not hers to atone for," Riven cut in, his voice sharp as shattered ice. "The pack has judged with undue haste, swayed by grief and conjecture." Turning his gaze upon Elara, his expression softened fractionally. She stared, utterly disoriented. Why was he here? Why defend her? He always seemed detached, remote, a figure of authority, not compassion. Riven advanced towards her, his movements measured and deliberate. The air crackled with tension. He reached down, his hand dwarfing hers as he pulled her to her feet. His touch sent a jolt through her, a strange confluence of trepidation and something else, something nameless, unknown. "The pack has decreed," Borax stammered, his voice trembling now. "The verdict must be executed." Ignoring him, Riven focused solely on Elara. He lowered his head, his breath a warm whisper against her ear. "Do you accept the Alpha's protection?" The question swirled in her mind. This was madness. Riven offered a reprieve, but at what cost? Indebtedness to the Alpha, a life lived in his shadow, might be a fate worse than death. But the image of the descending axe, the cold finality of oblivion, propelled her forward. "Yes," she whispered, barely audible. "I accept." Riven straightened, triumph blazing in his eyes. He turned to face the crowd, his voice resonating with newfound authority. "Then I claim her." Before anyone could react, Riven's hand shot out, seizing Elara by the nape of her neck, the grip surprisingly gentle despite its strength. He tilted her head, exposing the vulnerable curve beneath her ear. And then he bit. The pain was immediate, searing, like a brand forged in the heart of a volcano. A strangled cry escaped Elara's lips, swallowed by the stunned silence. She felt Riven's teeth sink deeper, piercing skin, drawing life. The world dissolved into a swirling vortex of sensation. When he released her, Elara staggered back, her hand instinctively flying to her neck. She stared at her crimson-stained fingers, her mind reeling, struggling to grasp the enormity of what had transpired. Riven stood before her, his gaze locked on hers, possessive and fierce. "She is mine now," he declared, his voice echoing through the hushed clearing. "Bound to me by blood, by law. Any who dare harm her will answer to me." The crowd remained silent, a tableau of shock, disbelief, and simmering resentment. The claiming bite, an archaic ritual, seldom enacted, binding a wolf to the Alpha, granting sanctuary while ensuring obedience. Riven had claimed her, saved her from one fate, only to deliver her to another. Taking her hand, his grip unwavering, he said, his tone softened, almost tender. "Come, you are with me now." Elara followed, her legs moving on autopilot. She glanced back at the crowd, the faces of those who had condemned her. The hatred still lingered, now tinged with apprehension. They knew challenging her was akin to challenging him. As they moved away from the platform, from the oppressive silence of the clearing, Elara couldn't escape the question of what she had truly done. Sped from death, she was now condemned to a different kind of prison. A prison of obligation, of servitude, tethered to a man she scarcely knew, a man who was both her rescuer and her jailer. Shadows deepened along the path to Riven's home, the trees whispering secrets just beyond her grasp. The air grew colder, the sharp scent of pine yielding to the heavy earthen aroma of damp soil and decaying leaves. Elara shivered from both the chill and the overwhelming uncertainty that awaited. Riven ushered her towards a large, imposing structure of dark stone and heavy timber, a place that spoke of both power and isolation. Life here would be anything but simple. She would be among enemies, those who resented her existence, those who believed she was undeserving of this reprieve. He opened the door, guiding her inside. Dimly lit, the interior boasted ornate, imposing furniture. Silent servants flitted through the shadows, eyes averted, faces impassive. "This is your home now," Riven said, his voice resonating in the cavernous space. "You are safe here." Elara surveyed her surroundings, a weight settling in her chest. Safe, perhaps. But free? Never. A prisoner in a gilded cage, bound to the Alpha by Fang and by covenant. She was meant to die. Instead, she had become his. The consequences of this claiming, she suspected, would prove far more intricate and far more perilous than she could currently comprehend. The Alphas claimed the world detonated in a supernova of agony. Elara's cry was swallowed by the tempest raging in her head. Riven's fangs locked onto her, ripping through skin, kindling an inferno that threatened to incinerate her from within. More than mere pain, it was an intrusion, a violent restructuring of her very essence. A primal force stirred within her, a desperate, instinctive recoil against the Alpha's forceful claim. Her body thrashed, a futile rebellion against the inevitable. The square erupted. Exclamations, shouts, a pandemonium of disbelief and fury. Elara registered nothing beyond the excruciating burn, the coppery taste of blood, and the raw, unleashed power radiating from Riven. He held her captive, his grip an iron vise, his presence a whirlwind of dominance. Through the red haze, she glimpsed faces' visages contorted with rage, shock, and an unsettling, predatory longing. The pack's faces, her new pack, their eyes reflecting the torchlight's dance, their expressions a volatile cocktail of animosity and fascination. This desecration of their laws, this disruption of their hierarchy, laid squarely at her feet. She, Elara Meadowsweet, was the spark. The tearing ceased, not fading gradually, but snapping off abruptly, leaving a throbbing emptiness. Riven raised his head, blood slicking his lips, his gaze incandescent with an intensity that stole her breath. He released her, yet the invisible cord remained, a phantom tether binding her to him, to his pack, to a destiny she never could have conceived. Strong arms, unfamiliar ones, lifted her. Reality bled back into focus, colors swirling into amorphous shapes, sounds distorting into grotesque echoes. She was being carried, but by whom? Her vision narrowed to fragmented glimpses. The mob's enraged faces, Kalen's stoic mask, and Riven, a looming monolith surveying them all, his expression an enigma. Then, oblivion. Elara surfaced to silk sheets and an olfactory symphony of pine interwoven with a feral musk that ignited a curious, unfamiliar warmth deep within her. She lay in a colossal bed, its canopy draped with weighty velvet. The room reeked of opulence, almost offensively so, adorned with antique furniture and intricate carvings. It was light years away from the cramped austerity of her childhood cottage. Disorientation crashed over her, a dizzying wave that threatened to capsize her equilibrium. She sat up, her body a chorus of muted aches. Her neck throbbed, a persistent reminder of the Alpha's brand. Gingerly, she touched the wound, now concealed beneath a thick bandage, yet still radiating an angry, pulsing heat. Fleeting memories surfaced, shattered and disjointed. The executioner's block, the crowd's roar, Riven's sudden intervention, the agonizing bite followed by nothingness. A void populated only by pain and bewilderment. Where was she? And why this place? She swung her legs over the bedside, her bare feet sinking into the luxurious embrace of a Persian rug. Silence permeated the room, broken only by the hearth's gentle crackle. She rose, her legs unsteady, and ventured a tentative step. The chamber was vast, dwarfing her entire former home. A sitting area, complete with plush armchairs and a blazing fireplace, dominated one end, while a formidable desk, buried beneath a landslide of papers, stood sentinel against the far wall. She felt exposed, vulnerable. The simple white shift she wore was foreign, soft against her skin, yet alien, like a role thrust upon her. A door, intricately etched with wolves and arcane symbols, stood across the room. She hesitated, her hand hovering above the frigid metal handle. Should she open it? What lay beyond? As if summoned, the door swung inward, revealing Riven. He filled the doorway, a dark silhouette against the hallway's muted light, his presence injecting the room with a palpable force. Garbed in simple black trousers and tunic, the fabric highlighting his sculpted physique, he was every inch the alpha, potent, intimidating, and utterly in command. "You're awake," he stated, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the chamber. Elara swallowed, her throat suddenly parched. Where am I?" "You are in my home," he responded, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "You are safe." "Safe?" she echoed, disbelief lacing her tone. "I was about to be executed." "You saved me, but what was that? What did you do to me?" He halted a few feet away, his gaze locked onto her face. "I claimed you," he declared, his voice devoid of inflection. "You are now bound to the Blackwood pack." "Claimed me?" She recoiled, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What does that mean?" "It means you are under my protection," he replied, his eyes narrowing. "And under my control." His words landed like physical blows, sharp and stinging. Protection? Control? She had merely traded one cage for another. "I didn't ask for this," she protested, her voice trembling. "I didn't want this." "Perhaps not," he conceded, his voice softening fractionally. "But it is done. You are mine now, Elara." The way he uttered her name, the possessive undercurrent, sent a glacial shiver down her spine. She was a possession, a trophy, a pawn in a game she couldn't comprehend. "Why?" she whispered, desperate for answers. "Why did you do it?" He hesitated, his expression shifting with a nuance she couldn't decipher. "I had my reasons," he said, his voice guarded. "What reasons?" she pressed, urgency fueling her words. "My parents were accused of treason. Everyone believes I'm guilty by association." "Their guilt is not yours," he asserted, his voice unwavering. "But everyone here, they hate me," she said, gesturing wildly. "They think I'm a traitor." "They will obey me," he countered, his voice laced with steel. "You are under my protection. No one will harm you." His words offered scant comfort, failing to quell the fear that gnawed at her core. She was ensnared, bound to a man she scarcely knew, encircled by animosity, her destiny inextricably entwined with his. "What now?" she asked, resignation weighing down her voice. He advanced, his presence towering, his gaze burning into her. "Now," he rumbled, his voice a low growl, "you learn your place." A world of wolves, the silence was a palpable weight, broken only by the metronomic pulse of a grandfather clock echoing from some distant chamber. Elara perched stiffly on the chaise, the rich velvet offering scant comfort against the turmoil within. Riven stood sentinel, a figure etched from shadow and starlight, commanding the space with an effortless stillness. The reek of storm-tossed pines clung to him, a visceral reminder of his feral nature. He'd remained motionless since his decree, offering neither solace nor explanation, only observing her with those unnerving molten eyes. At last he broke the quiet, his voice a ground bass vibration. The Baite forges a link, a bond of mates. Confusion clouded Elara's features, struggling to grasp his meaning through a haze of fear. Mate? As in marriage? The notion felt alien, unconnected to the stark reality of her existence. A mirthless twist touched Riven's lips. A crude approximation. The bond runs deeper, primal in its essence. It intertwines our very life threads, our emotions. It's the most profound connection possible between two wolves. But I'm not one. The words hung, a desperate plea for normalcy in a world overturned. You are now. A declaration, flat and absolute. The claiming transfigures you. It stirs the latent wolf within. Elara flinched, retreating further into the chase's embrace. I don't comprehend any of this. What does this signify for me? For the disgrace of my family? Their disgrace is no longer yours to bear. Riven advanced, his shadow enveloping her. The pack now considers you under my aegis. As such, they will respect, perhaps even accept, my choice. Your past transgressions are absolved by virtue of my claim. Absolved? Could it truly be so simple? Could a single act erase years of condemnation and shame? A tentative tendril of hope unfurled within her. And had you not claimed me? His eyes darkened, solidifying into black ice. You would be dead. The sentence was carried out. I intervened. Do not question my motivations, Elara. The warning resonated, a keen edge beneath the surface calm. She swallowed, fighting back the rising panic. What? What are the parameters of this bond? What is expected of me? Your primary allegiance is to me, Riven stated, his gaze unwavering and intense. To heed my commands, to acknowledge my authority as Alpha. You are under my protection, and by extension, my control. Control. The word stung like a lash, a brutal reminder of her utter lack of agency. She had traded one cage for another, a public demise for a gilded confinement. And if I refuse? Riven's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking. Refusal would be ill-advised. The bond isn't a request, Elara. It's an immutable force. To defy me is to defy your very being, your instinct for self-preservation. He began a slow circuit of the chaise, a predator weighing its quarry. The pack functions under a rigid order. My word as Alpha is law. My judgments are final. You will learn your place within that hierarchy, and you will adhere to it. And what is my place? Ah, Elara's voice was barely audible. That remains to be seen. He paused before her, his gaze piercing. Your actions will determine your standing within the pack. Earn their regard, and you may find a degree of integration. Earn their enmity, and you will find yourself in a situation far more precarious than the one you faced this morning. He gestured towards the extravagant surroundings, the shimmering silk drapes, the time-worn furniture, the art masterpieces adorning the walls. This is my domain, Elara, and now it is yours. You will want for nothing materially, but do not mistake courtesy for weakness. This is, at its heart, a world of wolves, and you must learn to navigate its treacherous currents. Elara stared, struggling to reconcile the savior who had rescued her from certain death with the implacable Alpha who now held her captive. What about the others? Will they accept me? Riven shrugged, a gesture of indifference. Some will, some won't. Expect resentment, envy, suspicion. You are an outsider, a human, claimed by their alpha. A situation ripe for conflict. He paused, his expression softening almost imperceptibly, though whether it was genuine concern or mere calculation, Elara couldn't discern. "I will safeguard you, Elara, but I cannot compel their acceptance. That is a struggle you must wage alone." "And if I lose that struggle?" she challenged, a defiant edge to her tone. "Then you will discover the true meaning of survival." Turning away, he moved towards the massive bay window overlooking the estate. "Rest, Elara. Today has been taxing. Tomorrow, your education in the ways of the Blackwood pack begins." He left her alone in the lavish room, the silence once more, a suffocating presence. Elara remained frozen on the chaise, her mind in turmoil, her body trembling. She was no longer Elara Meadowsweet, daughter of disgraced parents. She was something altered, claimed, bound to a man, a wolf she barely knew. Her life, once destined for an abrupt and merciful ending, had been irrevocably rerouted, plunged into a realm of shadows, instincts, and carnal bonds. She was supposed to have died, but Alpha Riven had other plans. Now, she had to learn how to endure them. As twilight painted the room in somber hues, Elara closed her eyes, attempting to summon a memory of her previous life, a life where the greatest peril was social rejection, not the fangs and claws of a hidden species. But the memories were fading, overpowered by the lingering burn of Riven's bite, the pervasive scent of pine and storm, and the stark understanding that she was now a prisoner in a world of wolves, where existence hinged on instinct, obedience, and the unpredictable whims of an alpha who held her future in his powerful hands. She drifted into a restless slumber, haunted by visions of golden eyes and bared teeth, eternally linked to the wolf who had saved her and condemned her with a single brutal act. Dinner at Blackwood Manor. The dining hall at Blackwood Manor felt less like a place to eat and more like a vast, echoing cathedral. Above, the vaulted ceiling vanished into gloom despite the bonfire raging in the immense hearth. The long, gleaming table, easily accommodating 20, held only a scattering of occupants tonight. Elara felt their stares, sharp and assessing, pressing against her like a physical weight as Riven guided her to the seat of honor. The air thrummed with unspoken critiques. Even the clink of cutlery seemed deafening in the heavy quiet. "Welcome," Riven rumbled, his voice cutting through the stifled atmosphere. He nodded to a waiting servant, who swiftly loaded Elara's plate with succulent roasted pheasant, fragrant vegetables, and a golden loaf. Though the food appeared tempting, even opulent, anxiety twisted in Elara's gut. Kale, his midnight eyes narrowed in scrutiny, sat across from her. His sharp features and raven hair framed a face that could be handsome, but his gaze held a frigid calculation that sparked instant distrust. He leaned back, a sardonic smile touching his lips. "So, the condemned breathes," he drawled, his tone like honed steel. "A provocative choice, Alpha." Riven's jaw hardened, a telltale muscle twitched in his cheek. "Elara is under my protection, Kale. Extend to her the respect owed my mate." The word mate resonated against Elara's skin like a brand. A claim, yes, but it also felt like the closing of a vise. She risked a glance at Riven, but his face remained an impenetrable mask. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped Kale. "Of course, Alpha. Forgive my curiosity. It's not every day we integrate a recent addition into our pack." His eyes lingered on Elara, dissecting her piece by piece. "Tell me, Elara, what strengths do you bring to Blackwood? Beyond, of course, the singular talent of ensnaring the Alpha's favor." Heat flooded Elara's face. She focused on her plate, pushing around the pheasant with her fork. "I possess no particular skills," she mumbled. "I am simply thankful for Riven's clemency." "Gratitude is admirable," Kale purred. "But Blackwood demands more than mere thankfulness. We are a pack forged of warriors, hunters, survivors. What contribution can you offer?" Before she could cobble together a reply, a warm hand settled over hers. Elara looked up into the kind, serene face of the woman seated at the table's far end. "Lyra, the pack healer," she surmised. "Kale," Lyra interjected gently, her voice a calming balm in the stiff air. "Must you grill the poor girl? She's barely arrived. Give her a chance to acclimate." Turning to Elara, her eyes shone with genuine concern. "Pay him no mind. Kale has a peculiar manner of showing his enthusiasm." Elara returned a weak smile. "Thank you, Lyra." A soft squeeze of her hand. "Tell me, Elara," she murmured, her voice a confidential whisper. "How are you feeling? The claiming it can be quite destabilizing." Elara hesitated. Destabilizing was an understatement. It was a complete upheaval. She could feel Riven's presence, a subtle, constant thrum in her mind that both soothed and unsettled. I'm still adjusting," she answered carefully. "It's overwhelming." "Indeed," Lyra replied, her eyes understanding. "The bond is potent, a profound connection that reshapes everything. But it also offers sanctuary, fortitude. Embrace it, Elara. Trust in it." Kale scoffed. "Trust? A treacherous concept, Lyra, especially when applied to one whose kin betrayed us all." Tension reignited, crackling in the air. Elara's stomach clenched. Her parents' treachery, the reason she'd been condemned. A constant specter looming over her, a reminder of her tainted heritage. Riven's voice lashed out, sharp and dangerous. "Enough, Kale. Elara's transgressions are forgiven. She is under my protection, and I will brook no further disrespect." He turned to Elara, his harsh features softening ever so slightly. "Eat, Elara. You require sustenance." Elara forced a bite of pheasant. It tasted like ashes. The pack's eyes remained fixed on her, probing, judging. She was an interloper, an aberration, a condemned woman granted reprieve. But at what price? Was this existence, steeped in suspicion and animosity, truly preferable to oblivion? The remainder of the dinner unfolded in a haze of stilted exchanges and veiled animosity. Kale continued to needle Elara with pointed questions, subtly testing her limits, while Lyra offered quiet encouragement and solace. Riven remained a silent sentinel, his gaze flickering between Elara and the others, a watchful guardian over his claim. As the meal dwindled to its end, Elara felt a mounting exhaustion. Mentally and emotionally depleted, she felt crushed by the weight of her altered reality. She craved escape from the relentless scrutiny, a moment of respite and solitude. Finally, Riven pushed back his chair. "Elara is weary," he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We shall retire for the evening." Taking her hand, his touch sent a shiver through her. He steered her from the dining hall, leaving the others to their own devices. As they moved through the dimly lit corridors of Blackwood Manor, Elara could not shake the sensation of walking into a meticulously crafted trap, an ornate cage where she would forever remain an outsider, a prisoner of her procker. Own survival. Whispers and shadows Riven's claim weighed on Elara, a suffocating presence within the Blackwood mansion's ornate yet unwelcoming confines. The very walls seemed to hum with hushed judgments every glance, a measuring scrutiny, She drifted through the packlands like a specter, present yet unseen. The familiar scent of earth and pine, formerly a balm, now stung with rejection, a constant reminder of her outsider status in their rigid society. After Lyra's instruction on tending the bite and weathering the changes to come, Elara attempted to chart a course through the sprawling house. Its immensity felt crushing, a world apart from her father's humble cottage. She longed for a haven, a quiet nook for reading, or perhaps a garden to cultivate, but her efforts met only veiled disdain. In the grand dining hall, a table laden with midday fare fell silent at her entrance. Faces, hardened by years of loyalty and steeped in suspicion, swiveled, their expressions openly hostile. A young woman with vibrant auburn hair, Brenna, she thought, audibly scoffed, earning a sharp rebuke from a scarred man. Even the children, usually bubbling with energy, stilled, their innocent curiosity poisoned by the prevailing animosity. Elara's stomach clenched. The roasted meats and crusty bread, a feast just days before, felt like grit in her mouth. She plucked an apple from a bowl, its cool surface a momentary comfort against her trembling fingers, and fled, the burn of their gazes searing her back. Later, drawn by the murmur of conversation and the allure of a crackling fire, she tentatively approached what looked like a common room. Two men were engrossed in a tense chess match, their brows knitted tight. A woman by the window stitched a tear in well-worn leather, her face reflecting a profound weariness. Elara paused in the doorway, seeking a spark of welcome, a hint of acceptance. "Excuse me," she began, her voice barely audible. "I was wondering, one of the chess players, a towering man with a shaved head and piercing cerulean eyes, looked up, his face a blank canvas. Torin Greymark." She recalled Lyra mentioning him as the pack beta. His stare was unwavering and devoid of warmth. "Wondering what, Meadowsweet?" he rumbled, his voice a low vibration that seemed to shake the very air. The others paused, turning their attention to the exchange. The woman by the window sighed softly, returning to her needlework, consciously disregarding Elara. The other chess player, a younger man with anxious eyes, nervously adjusted a pawn. Elara swallowed, fighting a sudden dryness in her mouth. I was just looking for somewhere to sit, to read, perhaps." Torin's gaze remained fixed. "There are ample chambers in this dwelling. I suggest you locate one to your liking." His tone held a dismissive edge, a thinly veiled warning. The silence thickened, stifling and heavy. Elara felt the cumulative weight of their disapproval, the unspoken decree that she was not wanted. Her hands curled into fists, her nails biting into her skin. The apple, once a small solace, now felt like a stone in her grasp. "Of course," she choked out, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. She turned and retreated, the sound of their resuming their activities a mocking chorus in her wake. Lost in the labyrinthine corridors, a deep loneliness settled over Elara. The mansion, intended as a sanctuary, had become a prison. Riven's claim, meant as a salvation, felt like a mark of ownership. She was ensnared, chained to a pack that loathed her, bound to a man who saw her as nothing more than property. The magnitude of her situation crashed around her, a wave of despair threatening to pull her under. She had been willing to sacrifice herself for her family's alleged transgressions, believing it would bring peace, even absolution. But now, she was neither dead nor free. She lived, yet her life was no longer hers. Reaching a shadowed alcove overlooking the sprawling grounds, Elara sank onto a cold stone bench, the chill seeping into her bones. The wind howled outside, rattling the window frames, a mournful score echoing the tumult within her. The moon, a mere crescent in the dark sky, cast elongated, restless shadows across the landscape, blurring the boundaries between reality and illusion. She gazed out at the vast expanse of Blackwood territory, the dense forest stretching into infinity. It was a raw, untamed realm, mirroring the wolves who inhabited it, and she, Elara Meadowsweet, was now one of them, yet utterly isolated. Closing her eyes, she summoned her father's image, his kind smile, his unwavering faith in her. Had he foreseen this as her destiny? Had he imagined the torment and isolation that awaited her within the Blackwood pack? Or had he, like her, thought death the only escape? A tear trickled down her cheek, a path of cold sorrow. She was lost, adrift on a sea of uncertainty, without a compass to guide her, or a shore in sight. The whispers and shadows of Blackwood Mansion had become her constant companions, reminders of her past, her present, and her grim, uncertain future. Training and trust, a hesitant dawn, tiptoed over the razorback peaks that ringed Blackwood. Elara stood rigidly in the courtyard, the chill creeping up from the inadequate soles of her ill-fitting boots. Riven, a study in controlled power, shifted before her dark hair, briefly gilded by the new light, framed a face of silent challenge, his amber eyes watchful. "You're a knot of tension," he rumbled, the sound resonating in the open space. "A wolf scents apprehension, Elara. It marks you as vulnerable." Fear left a bitter residue on her tongue. "I am vulnerable," she snapped, the words edgier than she intended. Riven's expression tightened, but he refused the bait. He simply indicated a practice sword discarded on the paving stones. "Take it up." She obeyed, reluctantly. The wood felt foreign and weighty in her untrained hands. Her life had been one of tending herbs in her mother's garden and losing herself in books, not of martial preparation. "Assume a stance," he ordered, his tone flat. Elara mirrored a posture she recalled from ancient tapestries, feet planted, blade raised at an ungainly angle. 2 swift strides closed the distance between them. "No." His hand enveloped hers on the hilt. A strange current, fear laced with something indefinable, coursed through her. He adjusted her grip, his fingers lingering a heartbeat too long. "Like this. Balance is paramount. You must be anchored, rooted, even in motion." He released her, allowing her to find her center. Again. The following hours became an ordeal. Riven was relentless, correcting every fault, every hesitation. Sweat trickled down her temples, muscles screamed their protest, and frustration mounted with each clumsy parry. "I can't," she finally choked, dropping the wooden sword with a resounding crack. Riven's face remained unreadable. "Everyone possesses an aptitude for something, Elara. The real question is, do you possess the resolve?" His words, like tiny barbs, found their mark. He considered her weak, useless. Perhaps he was correct. "What is the point?" she whispered, her voice barely carrying. "Even if I mastered swordsmanship, I'd still be caged here. That is not mine to determine." He retrieved the fallen weapon and offered it back. "But even in captivity, one can learn to defend oneself." She looked from the sword to Riven, searching his eyes for a sign concern. Calculation? She couldn't decipher it. With a sigh that felt like a surrender, she grasped the sword once more. As days bled into weeks, the training carved its mark. Gradually, Elara discovered a nascent rhythm, her movements shedding their clumsiness, gaining a semblance of fluidity. Riven's instruction remained rigorous, yet his criticisms acquired a subtle thread of patience. He elucidated the principles behind each defense, the strategy inherent in each maneuver. He spoke of the Blackwood pack, their strengths, their vulnerabilities, their lineage, their tenets. One afternoon, during a sparring session in the courtyard, Elara, in a moment of unexpected success, disarmed Riven, sending his practice sword skittering across the stone. She froze, breath caught in her throat, expecting a harsh rebuke. Instead, a slow smile illuminated Riven's features. "Not bad, Elara," he admitted, bending to retrieve his weapon. "Not bad at all." A rush of pride, quickly followed by debilitating fatigue, washed over her. Her arms trembled as she lowered the sword. "Enough for today," Riven conceded, his tone unusually gentle. He inclined his head towards the sprawling gardens. "Walk. Clear your mind." She gratefully relinquished the sword and escaped into the fragrant embrace of the gardens, breathing in the rich scents of roses and lavender. Finding a secluded bench beneath the cascading branches of a weeping willow, she sank onto it, closing her eyes. "Enjoying the respite?" Riven's voice startled her. He leaned against the willow's trunk, arms crossed, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "It's welcome," she confessed, surprised by his presence. "These gardens were my mother's sanctuary," Riven said, his gaze drifting towards the rose bushes. She believed even the most savage wolf required a haven of beauty. Elara studied his profile, attempting to penetrate the mask of the alpha. She caught a glimpse of something akin to sadness, a hint of vulnerability revealed. "She sounds like a woman of wisdom," Elara said quietly. Riven chuckled, the sound unexpectedly warm. She was. She also possessed a sharp wit. She would have appreciated you, Elara. Elara's breath hitched. "Why do you say that?" "You challenge me," Riven said, his eyes locking with hers. "My mother always admired those who dared to challenge me." A peaceful quiet descended, broken only by the whisper of the willow leaves. Elara felt her muscles loosen, the ever-present tension finally beginning to dissipate. "Thank you," she murmured, almost inaudibly. Riven arched a brow. "For what?" "For everything. For rescuing me. For the training. For not being an utter monster." Riven's laughter echoed through the gardens. "Don't become complacent, Elara. I remain the alpha." But a softness touched his eyes as he spoke, and for the first time, Elara glimpsed a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could forge a place for herself in this strange, perilous world. Perhaps she might even earn Riven's regard, his respect. She realized her own trust was already growing. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting long shadows across the landscape, Riven pushed away from the tree. "Come," he ordered, but a smile softened the command. "Let's eat. You require sustenance." Elara rose and fell into step beside him, a slow smile blooming on her face as she imagined the reactions of the pack members, witnessing her strolling beside their alpha, smiling. She would prove herself to them. She would demonstrate that she was not simply a fragile human. She was Elara Meadowsweet, and she was indomitable. The stolen artifact, the coppery tang of old blood, lingering like a specter from training bouts, plagued Elara. But tonight the scent soured, transmuted into something far more sinister, the sugary stench of dread and blame that had poisoned her childhood. She clamped her eyes shut, but the recollection surfaced nonetheless, unwelcome and insistent. Moonlight, fractured by the trees, bathed the assembled pack in stark relief, each face a mask of barely controlled fury. They formed a living barricade of muscle and menace around Elara's parents, like apex predators closing in for the kill. She was a wisp of a girl then, tucked behind her mother's skirts, fingers desperately gripping the familiar fabric, as if it offered protection against the impending cataclysm. "Traitors!" boomed a voice, cleaving the silence. Beta Theron, usually a picture of boisterous affability, now wore a grotesque mask of loathing. "You broke your vows! Guardians of the stone you were!" Liam Meadowsweet, Elara's father, stood ramrod straight despite the telltale tremble in his hands. A scholar by nature, his strength lay in erudition, not brawn. "We have done nothing to jeopardize the pack," he asserted, his voice tight yet firm. "The stone was safeguarded as charged." "Fabrications," spat Lyra, Theron's mate, her eyes twin embers of righteous anger. "It's gone. Disappeared. And you two had sole access." Aisling, her mother, stepped forward, emerald eyes flashing defiance. Renowned for her healing touch, her voice now resonated with tempered steel. "Accusations without substantiation are but whispers carried on the wind, Lyra. We would never breach such a trust." "Trust? Whoa." Theron's spittle landed on the forest floor. "You dare speak of trust when our most revered relic is missing. The Luna Stone, gone. Thanks to you." The air thrummed with palpable tension. Elara felt the pack's collective ire vibrating through the earth, a tangible threat that curdled her stomach. Peeking from behind her mother, she saw the object of their fury, a smooth obsidian orb that pulsed with an inner light, a constant presence on its pedestal, a symbol of their lineage. "Raid their den," Lyra screeched, venom dripping from her words. "Turn it inside out. Find the stone." The pack surged forward, a chaotic surge of snapping jaws and shifting limbs. Her father's measured pleas for reason were swallowed by the rising wave of animosity. The scene descended into pandemonium. Furniture toppled, tapestries were torn asunder, and books rained down like fallen leaves. Elara screamed, buffeted and separated from her mother. Aisling, struggling against two hulking wolves, her face a canvas of fear and resolution. A hand seized Elara, yanking her from the tumult. Ronan, Theron's son, his eyes now frighteningly glacial, a boy who had once shared her childhood games. "Stay put, Elara," he growled, shoving her towards a corner. Frozen with dread, she watched the pack desecrate her home. Her parents' laboratory was ransacked, vials shattered, herbs scattered. Chests were emptied, spilling garments and personal artifacts. Every nook, every cranny was violated. Then, a collective intake of breath, a silence more terrifying than the preceding uproar. Theron emerged from the lab, triumph etched on his face, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. His hands were bare. "It's not here," he declared, his tone devoid of inflection. "The stone is gone." Suspicion hung heavy, like a shroud. Elara's gaze found her parents. Their faces were masks of bewilderment, not guilt. "Where is it?" Theron pressed, his voice a low rumble of menace. "Reveal its hiding place." Her father shook his head, his voice barely audible. "We have no idea," he whispered. "We swear we don't know where it is." "Liar!" Lyra shrieked, lunging at Aisling. The pack surged anew, a vortex of accusations and threats. Elara pressed herself against the wall, trembling uncontrollably. She couldn't decipher this madness, this sudden hatred directed at her parents. All she understood was that something catastrophic was unfolding, shattering her world. The memory warped, fragmented. Elara was older, now standing in that same glade, but the moon was obscured by a shroud of clouds, casting long, sinister shadows. Her parents were bound to a rough-hewn pyre, their faces marred by bruises and blood. The pack formed a circle, their eyes burning with condemnation. Alpha Bram, Riven's father, stood before them, his voice a thunderous pronouncement. "Liam and Aisling Meadowsweet, you stand accused of stealing the Luna Stone, a sacred relic entrusted to your very care. Despite your denials, the stone remains missing. Under the laws of our people, you are deemed culpable." Elara attempted to reach her parents, but Ronan restrained her, his grip still firm, now tinged with regret. "Please," she begged, tears coursing down her cheeks. "They've done nothing. They're innocent." Ronan remained silent, his gaze locked on the unfolding tragedy. Alpha Bram raised his hand, silencing the mob. "Any final words?" he asked, his voice flat and devoid of any empathy. Her father met her gaze, his eyes filled with fathomless sorrow. "Be strong, Elara," he urged, his voice cracking. "Remember who you truly are." Her mother offered a gentle, unwavering smile. "Never relinquish the truth, my darling," she said softly, "even when the world turns against you." Alpha Bram lowered his hand. A communal gasp rippled through the crowd. Elara squeezed her eyes shut, unable to witness the approaching horror. Elara bolted upright, gasping. The chill of Riven's chambers seeped into her bones. The memories were agonizingly fresh, as if etched into her very soul. The Stone of Luna, the accusation that had decimated her family, the reason she was condemned to death. But Riven had intervened, claimed her. Why? What game was he playing? Did he share the pack's belief of her parents' guilt? Did he suspect she possessed some knowledge regarding the stone's disappearance? Her gaze swept the room, lingering on the dancing shadows. Was the answer to the stone hidden here, buried beneath layers of pack secrets? Unearthing it became imperative, for her parents, for herself. But how could she seek the truth while confined as a prisoner within Riven's gilded cage? A mate, bound to an alpha who served as both her savior and her captor? The key, she realized, was Riven himself, deciphering his motives, navigating the perilous currents of pack dynamics, and, finally, confronting the specters of her past. Secrets and lies Riven's brand pulsed against Elara's flesh, a relentless reminder of her compromised existence. Not quite liberty, more a gilded prison, perhaps even more crushing than the swift end awaiting her. Tonight, Elara would test its confines. Blackwood Manor presented itself as a web of dim corridors and resonant halls. She bided her time until the moon crested high, sketching elongated, spectral patterns across the gleaming parquetry, then slipped silently from her chamber. The Blackwood pack's signature aroma, pungent pine and dewy earth, hung in the air, intensified tonight, laced with an undercurrent of foreboding. Her goal? The Alpha's sanctuary, but domain off-limits save for Riven and his inner circle. It was there, she surmised, amidst the age-worn books and forgotten accounts, that the truth concerning her parents remained hidden. Charting the unfamiliar layout of the estate proved a trial. Each complaining joint in the floorboards, each stirring beyond sight, ignited a spark of pure adrenaline. She clung to the shadows, a wraith in her own home, her pulse a frantic tattoo against her ribs. At last, she stood before the study. The portal, fashioned from somber, weighty oak, bore no adornment, yet radiated an undeniable aura of dominion. Elara hesitated, her hand hovering over the chill metal. Doubt assailed her. What if her instincts deceived her? What if her only discovery was further proof of her parents' guilt? Drawing a steadying breath, she eased the door inward and stole inside. The study lay steeped in twilight, illuminated only by a solitary, wavering candle perched on Riven's desk, painting elongated, restless shadows across the space. Books lined the walls, their spines bearing the marks of years. The very air seemed saturated with the scent of aging paper and beeswax. It felt less like a working space, more a sepulchre of buried secrets. Elara moved with dispatch, her gaze sweeping the room. She began with the desk, sifting through stacks of documents, her fingers brushing against parchment filled with elaborate script, pack affairs, commercial treaties, strategies of war. Nothing to illuminate the enigma of her parents or the Luna Stone. A tide of frustration began to rise within her. Moving to the bookshelves, she plucked volumes at random, probing for hidden recesses or concealed missives. The titles spoke of arcane lore, pack law, chronicles of the Blackwood lineage. She unearthed only dust and crumbling pages. Then, her fingertips encountered an anomaly. A volume, bound in unadorned leather, utterly devoid of a title, sat slightly askew upon the shelf. She drew it forth. It possessed unexpected weight, and upon opening, she discovered handwritten entries, not printed text. Good diary. The penmanship struck a chord, her father's. Her hope soared. She immersed herself in the script, her eyes devouring the words, her mind laboring to assemble the fragments of the past. The entries were irregular, spanning several years. They chronicled mounting unease within the pack, insidious whispers of rebellion, and a growing apprehension that someone plotted against Riven. Then, she encountered an entry that stole her breath. The Luna Stone, they coveted. They believe it unlocks unimaginable power, but I will not yield it. I swore an oath to safeguard it, and so I shall. Elara's thoughts spun. Her father, protecting the Luna Stone? Yet all believed him the thief. She pressed on, her fingers trembling as she turned the leaves. The entries grew ever more agitated, permeated with paranoia and dread. Her father wrote of surveillance, of feeling time running thin. The final entry bore a date mere days before her parents' apprehension. I have concealed it. They will never locate it. Elara, should fate turn against me, you must protect it. You alone are worthy of my trust. The journal ceased abruptly there. Elara closed it, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Her father had not pilfered the Luna Stone. He had shielded it. But from whom? And where had he secreted it? A sudden sound from the corridor jolted her. Footfalls. Heavy, measured footfalls. Riven. Panic seized her. She must conceal herself. Quickly replacing the journal on the shelf, striving to mask any evidence of tampering, she slipped behind a grand tapestry adorning the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door swung open, and Riven entered with a commanding stride. He wore simple black pants and a tunic, his dark hair slightly awry. He appeared weary, yet his eyes held a sharp, vigilant quality. He approached his desk, settling into the chair, his gaze encompassing the room. Elara held her breath, praying he detected nothing amiss. He selected a stack of papers and began to peruse them, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence in the room pressed heavily, punctuated only by the candle's sputter and the occasional rustle of paper. Elara waited, her muscles protesting, her mind racing. She had to flee, to discover a means of escape before Riven discovered her. At length, after what stretched into an eternity, Riven rose. He moved toward the bookshelves, his eyes traversing the spines. Elara's heart nearly stopped. Was he searching for something in particular? Had he discerned the journal's displacement? He reached out, his fingers caressing the plain leather of the book she had handled. Elara ceased breathing. "A compelling choice," he murmured, his tone low and resonant. "Does pack history hold such allure for you, Elara?" He knew. She emerged from behind the tapestry, her face drained of color, her eyes wide with terror. I couldn't sleep," she stammered. "I was merely curious." Riven turned to face her, his expression a blank canvas. "Curious about what, Elara?" he inquired, his voice threaded with danger. "About your parents? About the Luna Stone?" Elara stalled. Should she confide in him? Could she dare trust him? "I simply desire to understand what transpired," she admitted finally, her voice barely audible. "I long to comprehend why they stood accused of betraying the pack." Riven's eyes narrowed perceptibly. "The evidence spoke plainly," he stated. "They absconded with the Luna Stone and attempted to escape. But what if they did not?" Elara countered, her voice gaining in resolve. "What if they were victims of treachery? What if their intent was to protect it?" Riven fixed her with a prolonged stare, his countenance unyielding. "You are clinging to illusions, Elara," he said at last, "seeking to rewrite the narrative to serve your own ends." "But what if I am correct?" she pleaded. "What if reality diverges completely from your accepted truth?" Riven advanced a step, his gaze piercing hers. "Truth is a perilous weapon, Elara," he warned. "At times, it is best left undisturbed. But I cannot," she asserted, her voice unwavering. "I must uncover the truth, regardless of the consequences." A subtle shift softened Riven's features. "Then temper your desires, Elara," he cautioned. "For on occasion, the truth possesses the power to shatter you." Kale's game. The air in the Blackwood packhouse crackled with a tension thicker than the coming storm. Elara felt it crawl on her skin. 1,000 invisible eyes judging, dissecting. Kale Ironwood, Riven's second, was a master conductor of this symphony of disapproval. He was a shadow, always at the periphery, his words like drops of poison seeping into the pack's collective consciousness. Elara overheard snippets, carefully crafted to reach her ears. "She's weak," he'd murmur to a group near the training yard, loud enough for her to hear as she passed. "A meadowsweet amongst blackwoods, like a lamb in a wolf den." He never looked directly at her, his eyes always sliding away at the last moment, leaving her to grapple with the sting of his words and the knowing glances of the others. His tactics were insidious, rarely direct confrontation. He preferred to orchestrate situations, letting the pack's ingrained prejudices do the work for him. He'd forget to inform her of pack meetings, leaving her to arrive late and flustered, a clear sign of disrespect to the Alpha's authority. He'd misplace her training equipment, forcing her to use ill-fitting gear that hampered her progress and made her look incompetent. One afternoon, Elara was summoned to the kitchens to help prepare the evening meal. It seemed a simple enough task, peeling vegetables alongside the other pack women. But Kale, leaning against the doorway, ensured it was anything but. He engaged the women in a casual conversation about the Luna Stone, his voice laced with skepticism. "Do you truly believe her parents innocent?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over them, landing briefly on Elara. They were trusted members of the pack. Betrayal cuts deepest from those closest. The women, who had been tentatively warming to Elara, stiffened. Doubts, carefully sown by Kale, blossomed in their eyes. Elara felt a familiar coldness settle in her stomach. She tried to focus on the task at hand, peeling a potato with trembling fingers, but the weight of their suspicion was suffocating. Later, as she carried a heavy pot of stew towards the dining hall, she stumbled. Whether it was an accident or a well-placed foot, she couldn't be sure. The stew splattered across the floor, scalding her arm and staining the pristine stone tiles. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Kale, of course, was there, a mask of concern on his face. "Are you all right, Elara?" he asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Perhaps this work is too strenuous for you." Humiliation burned hotter than the stew. Elara gritted her teeth, ignoring the throbbing pain in her arm. She met Kale's gaze, seeing the glint of triumph in his eyes. This wasn't just about making her look clumsy, it was about undermining her position, reminding everyone that she didn't belong. Riven, who had been overseeing the training exercises, arrived at the scene, his expression thunderous. He assessed the situation in a glance, his eyes hardening as they landed on Kale. "See to it that Elara's burn is treated," he commanded, his voice like cracking ice. He then turned to Elara, his gaze softening slightly. "Come with me." He led her to his private chambers, the silence between them thick with unspoken tension. He examined her burn, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Kale is testing you," he said, his voice low. "He wants to break you." "He's succeeding," Elara admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Riven's jaw tightened. "Don't let him. He thrives on weakness. Show him strength." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I know this isn't easy for you, Elara. But you have to understand, Kale has been my second for a long time. He has his own ambitions." "Ambitions that include taking your place?" Elara asked, her voice sharp. Riven didn't answer directly. "He believes he knows what's best for the pack. He sees you as a threat to that vision." "And what about you, Riven?" Elara asked, pulling away from his touch. "Do you see me as a threat?" His silence was answer enough. Elara turned away, the weight of his doubt settling heavily on her shoulders. She was trapped, not just by the mark on her neck, but by the intricate web of pack politics and Riven's own internal conflicts. That night, sleep eluded her. The whispers of the pack echoed in her mind, amplified by the darkness. She rose from her bed and made her way to the training yard. The cool night air a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the pack house. She picked up a practice sword, the familiar weight grounding her. She began to move, her movements fluid and precise, fueled by anger and frustration. She imagined Kale's face on the training dummy, each strike a release of pent-up emotion. As she sparred with the darkness, she sensed a presence behind her. She whirled around, sword raised, to find Riven watching her, his expression unreadable. "You should be resting," he said, his voice soft. "I can't," Elara replied, her chest heaving. "Not while Kale is working to turn the entire pack against me." Riven stepped closer, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "Then you need to fight back," he said, but not with anger. "With skill. With cunning. Show them why I chose you." He took the sword from her hand, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. He demonstrated a series of complex maneuvers, his movements effortless and deadly. "Kale is a skilled strategist," he said. You need to learn to anticipate his moves, to turn his own tactics against him. He spent the next hour training her, pushing her harder than ever before. He didn't offer words of comfort or reassurance, but his presence was a silent acknowledgement of the battle she was facing. As dawn approached, Elara stood panting, her muscles aching, but her spirit renewed. She still didn't trust Riven completely, but she recognized a flicker of something akin to respect in his eyes. And for the first time since arriving at the Blackwood packhouse, she felt a glimmer of hope. She wouldn't let Kale break her. She would learn his game and play it better. A healer's wisdom, the healing chamber was a haven Elara hadn't dared imagine. Tranquility reigned. The air infused with the fragrance of curing herbs and gently bubbling infusions a world away from the seething animosity that stained the Blackwood Pack's territory. Lyra Whitestone, the Pack's caregiver, possessed a lithe grace, her touch a comfort, her gaze piercing the barriers Elara so carefully maintained. "You bear burdens far too great for one so young, Elara," Lyra murmured, her tone like a calming balm as she treated a minor wound from Elara's practice with Riven. The training regime was punishing, designed to push beyond endurance, to reshape her into someone worthy, or so Riven insisted. It also served as an escape, a refuge from the murmurs and the pervasive sense of being unwanted. Elara winced, not from the antiseptic's bite, but from Lyra's astute perception. "It's nothing," she mumbled, eyes sliding away. "Just pack dynamics." A soft chuckle resonated from Lyra, a sound of genuine warmth. "Pack dynamics is a polite term for a viper pit, my dear. And you, regrettably, are standing square in the center." She dabbed at the cut. Riven's choice, it caused ripples. "You must be aware." Elara was acutely aware. Every icy stare, each veiled insult, every calculated act of obstruction declared it. She was an oddity, a human favored by the Alpha, a symbol of weakness in a community that prized strength above all else. "I know," she stated, a crisp edge to her voice. "I'm trying to adjust." "Adaptability is crucial," Lyra conceded, her gaze unwavering. "But not at the expense of your spirit. You possess an inner spark, Elara. Don't allow it to be extinguished." She reached for a pot of thick jade-colored salve. "This will aid the healing process. For both the body and, perhaps, the heart." As Lyra smoothed on the ointment, a wave of coolness washed over Elara's skin, a momentary reprieve from the burning resentment that simmered within. "Riven. He says he's preparing me for anything." Lyra's face remained unreadable. "Riven operates by his own designs. A complex soul, weighed down by responsibility and haunted by specters of the past." She paused, studying Elara intently. "He selected you, Elara. That much is clear. But his reasons, those are for him to share. Proceed with caution, but remain receptive. Heed your intuition, child. It will serve you well." The following days blurred into a routine, demanding training under Riven's watchful eye, strained meals in the great hall where every morsel felt like a test, and whispered conversations in the healing room with Lyra. It was during one such visit that Elara finally dared to voice the question that had lingered, unspoken. "The Luna Stone." She began, almost inaudibly. "What can you tell me about it?" Lyra's hands froze, her expression clouding over with a distant melancholy. "The Luna Stone. It's the very lifeblood of the pack, Elara. A font of power, of equilibrium. They say it enhances the connection between the Alpha and his people, ensuring prosperity and fortitude." "And it's gone," Elara finished, the words heavy with dread. "Vanished, or pilfered, Lyra corrected, her voice hushed. The details surrounding its disappearance are shrouded in secrecy and conjecture. Your parents. She hesitated, choosing her words with care. They were implicated in its theft, and ultimately with betrayal. But were they culpable? Elara pressed, her pulse quickening. Lyra sighed, a sound heavy with sorrow. I cannot say, child. I only know that the loss of the stone and the ensuing accusations tore the pack asunder. Riven was young men, newly burdened by the Alpha's mantle. The weight was immense. Kale, Elara uttered, the name leaving a bitter taste. He seems to wield considerable influence within the pack. A slow nod from Lyra. Kale is Riven's right hand, his most trusted confidant. He has been at Riven's side since childhood. His allegiance to the pack is unwavering, and he distrusts outsiders deeply. And he clearly doesn't deem me worthy of Riven's attention, Elara added, the bitterness surfacing. Kale adheres to tradition, to the established order, Lyra explained gently. He perceives you as a threat to the pack's stability, a living reminder of past treachery. So, he's attempting to eliminate me, Elara concluded, stating the obvious. Lyra placed a steadying hand on Elara's arm. You possess more strength than you realize, Elara. Never underestimate yourself. And don't allow Kale to dictate your course. Discover your own power within this pack, and prove him wrong. As days morphed into weeks, Elara discovered herself relying increasingly on Lyra's guidance and empathy. The healing chamber evolved into a refuge, a space where she could discard the mask of indifference she wore for the rest of the pack and reveal her vulnerability. Lyra shared tales of the pack's ancestry, of trials faced and overcome, of the profound link between the wolves and their ancestral lands. She spoke of the ancient magic coursing through their veins, of their sacred duty to safeguard the balance of nature. We are not merely beasts, Elara, Lyra declared one evening, as they sat near the flickering hearth in the healing chamber. We are guardians. We are protectors. We are bound to this land, to each other, by a connection deeper than blood. Elara listened, enthralled by Lyra's words. She had always been captivated by werewolf lore, by their dual nature, the eternal struggle between the human and the wolf. But it was Lyra who brought it to life, who illuminated the true significance of belonging to a pack. Riven carries that responsibility like a millstone, Lyra continued, her voice softening. He has witnessed too much death, too much anguish. He has retreated inward, erecting defenses around his heart. But beneath that hardened facade, a flicker of light remains. You, Elara, have the power to rekindle that flame. Elara wasn't sure if she believed Lyra's assessment. Riven remained an enigma, an intricate puzzle. Yet, Lyra's words instilled a sense of hope, a faint possibility that there was more to Riven than met the eye. One afternoon, Elara entered the healing chamber to find Lyra preparing a small satchel. Are you traveling? Elara inquired, a sudden pang of anxiety in her chest. Lyra offered a wistful smile, laced with understanding. I am needed elsewhere, Elara. An affliction is spreading through the neighboring Silver Creek pack. I must offer my aid. But when will you return? Elara asked, her voice betraying her apprehension. Lyra cupped Elara's face, her touch radiating warmth and reassurance. I cannot say, child, but do not despair. You are stronger than you believe. You have learned much during your time here. Trust in your abilities, Elara. and remember my teachings." With a final embrace, Lyra departed, leaving Elara feeling more isolated than ever before. The healing chamber, once a sanctuary, now felt barren, devoid of its comforting atmosphere and wisdom. Elara stood there for what seemed an eternity, gazing at the vacant space where Lyra had stood, a sense of unease settling in her bones. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that Lyra's absence was not merely temporary. It was a pivotal moment, an indication that a tempest was brewing, and she was poised to be swept up in its fury. Vulnerability twilight bled across the sky, a canvas of dye, indigo and ember. As the cavernous hall of the Blackwood pack house settled into an evening hush, embers pulsed in the hearth, casting long, animated shadows that wrestled with the encroaching night. Elara, curled on a plush rug, feigned attention to a book, her thoughts instead consumed by the hypnotic play of the flames. Riven's arrival was a subtle shift in the very air. He moved with a predator's economy, his presence a quiet assertion of power. He lowered himself into a chair, across from her, the leather sighing softly beneath his weight. For a long, silent beat, he simply observed her, his expression an enigma in the dim light. "You're lost in thought," he finally rumbled, his voice a deep vibration that seemed to settle in the bones. Elara startled, dragging her focus back to the present. "Just thinking," she murmured, barely audible, "about Lyra." A slow nod from Riven. Her departure was untimely. "She served the pack faithfully for many years. She showed me kindness," Elara offered, a thread of sorrow in her voice. "She saw potential I hadn't recognized within myself." The silence returned, thick with unspoken sentiments. Riven dispelled it. "Kindness is a rare bloom in this harsh climate, Elara, especially here." "Why?" she probed, curiosity piqued. "Why is the Blackwood pack so wary?" He exhaled, raking a hand through raven locks. "We've weathered more than our share of treachery, Elara. It's tempered us, yes, but it's also left its marks." He paused, his tone softening. "My father a strong alpha, but his trust was misplaced. It cost him everything." Elara watched him, detecting a chink in his formidable armor. "What occurred?" Riven's jaw hardened. "Betrayed by his own beta. A blatant grab for power. It was brutal. I was barely old enough to claim the prez. Alpha's mantle. I was forced to mature overnight, to make decisions no fledgling should ever face." His gaze drifted to the dancing flames, his eyes mirroring their restless movement. "I vowed then to never be caught off guard again, to safeguard this pack, at any cost. Even if it meant claiming someone like me?" The question hung between them, an unspoken accusation. Riven's gaze sharpened, his eyes delving into hers. "You were not intended to perish, Elara, not like that. Not for a crime you didn't commit." "But you barely know me," she countered. "How can you be so certain?" "I glimpsed something within you that day, Elara. A flicker of defiance, a resilience at odds with your circumstances. And I felt compelled to act, to intervene in some way." A shadow of something complex flickered across his face. "Moreover, my choices seldom possess a single layer. Elara, there exist considerations." Elara frowned, intuiting the unspoken words, the secrets swirling beneath his composed exterior. "What considerations?" Riven shook his head, a faint, enigmatic smile gracing his lips. "Some truths are best left undisturbed, Elara. For the moment, at least." He shifted the conversation, his voice gaining levity. Tell me of your life before all of this. Paint me a picture of who you were." Elara hesitated, then inhaled deeply. "My parents, they were content, deeply in love. We lived in a small haven at the forest's edge. My father, a village healer. My mother, a weaver of exquisite tapestries. They imparted their wisdom and skills to me." Her tone grew tender as she recalled her childhood. The memories of bittersweet ache. "We whiled away hours in the garden, tending herbs and blossoms. My mother would regale me with tales of the ancient ways, of the lingering magic in the world." She faltered, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. Riven reached out and gently swept it away with his thumb. "What happened to them?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. Elara's voice cracked. "They were accused of dark practices, of poisoning the pack's water source. Lies, all lies, but no one listened to our pleas." Her hands clenched into fists, knuckles bone white. "They were executed without recourse, and I was next in line." Riven's eyes darkened to the color of storm clouds. "I am aware of their innocence, Elara." Surprise flickered across her features. "How can you be certain?" "Because I have seen the evidence," he said, his tone laced with steel. "Evidence conveniently suppressed during their sham of a trial." Elara's breath hitched. "You know who framed them?" A measured nod from Riven. "I harbor strong suspicions. However, I require irrefutable proof, and that, in part, is why." He paused, his voice gentler now. "That is why I could not allow you to die, Elara. You, and they, deserve retribution." Tears streamed down Elara's face as she absorbed his words. "But why conceal this from me? Why allow me to believe her because your trust is paramount, Elara? And trust is a delicate structure, lengthy to build, but easily demolished." He leaned in closer, his gaze penetrating. "I require your trust now, Elara, more than ever before." Elara searched his eyes, scrutinizing for any hint of deceit. She found only sincerity, a profound conviction that resonated within her. She reached out, her fingers interlacing with his. "I place my trust in you, Riven," she declared, her voice resolute. "I do." A fleeting smile touched his lips, a mere suggestion. "Excellent," he said. "For the reckoning draws near, Elara, and when it arrives, it will shake this pack to its foundations." The fire crackled, casting serpentine shadows that danced across their countenances. In the shifting light, they gazed at one another, two souls entwined by destiny, their fates inextricably linked in a tapestry of deceit and buried truths. The shared vulnerability of the evening had forged an unexpected bond, a fragile connection that might just prove resilient enough to weather the tempest brewing on the horizon. The hidden library, the Blackwood packhouse's frigid atmosphere clung to Elara, a constant reminder of her outsider status. Days had dissolved into a blur of strained smiles, guarded gazes, and the heavy yoke of Riven's claim. He remained an enigma, part guardian, part warden, his motivations as impenetrable as the primeval woods surrounding the pack's territory. Driven by a desperate need for comprehension, to gain purchase in this dangerous game, Elara sought refuge in the closest thing to peace she could find, the library. It was a meager sanctuary, a confined space overflowing with laden shelves, the air saturated with the aroma of antique paper and forgotten traditions. Yet, within those brittle pages, she hoped to unearth answers, to decipher the conspiracy that had decimated her family and chained her to Riven. This time, Instead of scrutinizing her parents' demise, she hunted for any mention of the Luna Stone, its origins, its function. Anything to elucidate the artifact that seemed to drive everyone's obsession. Her fingers trailed along the spines, the leather brittle and time-worn, the gilded lettering faded by the passage of ages. A particular volume, larger and heavier than its companions, snagged her attention. Tucked far back on a shelf, it seemed deliberately concealed. With burgeoning curiosity, she wrestled it free, a miniature dust storm erupting in protest. The book's binding was a deep, almost inky leather, utterly devoid of title or any identifying mark. As she hefted its weight, the shelf behind it issued a threatening groan. Elara halted, a disquieting premonition prickling her skin. Something felt amiss. She explored the back of the shelf, her fingertips encountering a subtle ridge. Applying pressure, she felt a distinct click, and with a low grinding sound, the entire bookshelf swung inward, revealing a concealed passage. Her breath caught in her throat. A secret library. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped across the threshold, the bookshelf gliding back silently behind her. The air in this hidden chamber possessed an intensified chill, a more oppressive weight than in the main library. It reeked of damp earth, mingled with something ancient and undefinable. Torches flickered in wall sconces, casting shifting shadows that danced ominously. A multitude of shelves stretched into the gloom, laden with tomes that appeared far older, far more fragile than anything she'd encountered before. This was no mere library. It was a vault of forbidden lore. Her fingers danced along the spines, identifying languages whispered about only in fearful undertones, archaic dialects of the first ones, the progenitors of all werewolves. Titles hinted at long-lost rituals, obscured histories, and the true nature of the Luna Stone itself. This was more than she could have dared hope for. She selected a volume, its leaves crisp and yellowed with antiquity. The script was foreign, a series of elaborate symbols and flowing calligraphic flourishes. Yet, as she focused on it, a strange sensation bloomed within her, a resonance in the very core of her being. The glyphs seemed to rearrange themselves, to resolve into coherence. Within the stone's heart resides the power of creation and annihilation, she murmured, her voice barely audible. A power to be wielded with wisdom, lest it consume the wielder entirely. She ravenously consumed the text, her gaze flitting across the ancient characters, her mind struggling to grasp the implications. The Luna Stone was not merely a source of power, but a conduit, a gateway to a realm beyond imagining, beyond controlling. It could magnify the user's intentions, transforming a benevolent soul into a force for unparalleled good, or twisting a corrupt nature into a weapon of indescribable devastation. Another passage riveted her attention. The stone resonates with the blood. Only those of unblemished intent, heirs to the legacy of the first ones, can truly command its power. Others will be devoured, their minds fractured, their bodies reduced to dust. A tremor coursed through Elara. The stone was not indiscriminate. It was a heritage, a birthright, and the fervor with which so many within the pack, including those complicit in her parents' framing, sought to claim it for themselves, spoke volumes regarding their true goals. Abruptly, a sound echoed through the clandestine library, a faint scraping emanating from the concealed entrance. Elara froze, her pulse thundering in her ears. Someone approached. She replaced the book, swiftly, attempting to erase every trace of her presence. Concealment was paramount. She darted behind a towering bookshelf, pressing herself against the cold stone, listening intently. The scraping intensified, drawing nearer. Then, a voice, low and gravelly, shattered the stillness. "I know you're here, little wolf," It wasn't Riven. Dread seized Elara's heart. She recognized the cadence. It was Kale, Riven's second, a man whose gaze always held a spark of malevolence when directed at her. What brought him here? How could he have discovered the hidden library? Don't compel me to ferret you out, Kale pressed, his tone dripping with threat. Emerge now, and perhaps I'll expedite matters. Elara held her breath, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. Capture was not an option, not within these walls, not burdened by the information she now possessed. But escape? Her gaze flickered across the shelves, searching for a secondary passage. There was none. The sole egress was the one Kale now guarded. Think, Elara, think. Her fingers brushed against something on the adjacent shelf, a small, ornate box crafted from dark wood. Though secured with a lock, it looked ancient, vulnerable. Acting on impulse, she seized the box and slammed it against the shelf's edge. The lock splintered, and she flipped a lid. Within, nestled on faded velvet, lay a slim, silver dagger. Its blade, honed to a keen edge, sat above a handle inlaid with intricate carvings. Scant, yet better than bare hands. Drawing a deep breath, Elara grasped the dagger, its cold metal a stark contrast to her fevered skin, and emerged from behind the bookshelf, steeling herself to face her pursuer. "Searching for something, Kale?" she asked, her voice a surprisingly steady challenge. Kale pivoted to confront her, his eyes widening in astonishment. "You," he growled. "I should have anticipated. Riven's pet, nosing around where she doesn't belong." "My presence is my prerogative," Elara retorted, brandishing the dagger. "And at this moment, I choose to be here." Palin's laugh was a frigid, mirthless bark. "You honestly believe that trinket can safeguard you? You're a weakling, a disgrace to this pack." "Perhaps," Elara conceded, her grip tightening on the dagger's hilt. "But I won't shrink from fighting for what I hold as truth." The air vibrated with tension, the silence punctuated only by the flickering torchlight and the frantic cadence of Elara's heart. The hunter had cornered his prey, but the prey resolved to struggle to the end. Shadows at the gate, the alarm's shriek shattered the stillness, an abrasive discord that scraped raw against Elara's senses. She shot up in bed, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. Riven's side was already cold, the space beside her empty. Outside, bedlam reigned. Distant howls mingled with ragged shouts, and the unmistakable guttural snarl of werewolves in transition. The Blackwood pack was besieged. A frigid spike of terror threatened to immobilize her. This wasn't training. This was outright combat. She flung herself out of bed, tugging on clothes, her fingers fumbling with haste. Her palm gravitated to the familiar grip of the dagger strapped to her thigh, a meager reassurance against the encroaching dread. Bursting from their chamber into the corridor, she found the air thick with the tang of adrenaline and sharp scent of pines. Pack members hurtled past, their faces set in grim lines, eyes blazing with savage resolve. Torin Greymark, jaw clenched, snapped commands that resonated through the hallways. He flicked a contemptuous glance her way. "Stay put, Meadowsweet. You'll only be a hindrance." His words, like a lash, stung, but Elara dismissed them. She wasn't a porcelain figure to be locked away. This was her pack now, her refuge, however begrudgingly claimed. She would stand for it. She trailed the surge of warriors toward the main gate, the din of battle escalating with each stride. Reaching the courtyard, she found a scene of brutal and terrifying grandeur. A maelstrom of fur and fangs churned before her, a cacophony of snarls and growls forming a savage symphony beneath the rising moon's gory light. The stench of iron and upturned earth was overwhelming. Blackwood warriors fought with feral abandon, their dark pelts a stark contrast to the silver gray of their assailants, the Shadow Wolves. Elara recognized their emblem, a stylized crescent moon weeping droplets of blood, gleaned from forgotten library tomes. Infamous raiders, they were the scourge of the Northern Territories. Riven was a dark cyclone in the thick of the fray, his movements a display of deadly artistry. He carved a path through the Shadow Wolves, his fangs and claws leaving a trail of ruined bodies in his wake. Elara's breath hitched in her throat. He was magnificent, fearsome, every inch the alpha. Amid the pandemonium, she caught sight of Kale near the battle's edge, his gaze burning with an unnerving intensity. He remained aloof, seemingly, observing. A fleeting suspicion pricked at Elara's mind, but she pushed it aside. Now was not the time for distrust. A young Blackwood, barely a man, was flung to the ground by a hulking shadow wolf. The attacker stood over him, poised to deliver the final strike. Acting on pure instinct, Elara surged forward, adrenaline flooding her senses. With a defiant cry, she launched herself at the shadow wolf. Startled, the beast pivoted, its predatory gaze locking onto her. Its yellow eyes burned with a chilling hunger. Elara knew she was outmatched, yet she stood her ground, her dagger a meager comfort in her trembling grip. The shadow wolf pounced. Elara sidestepped, narrowly evading its snapping jaws. She slashed at its flank, eliciting a sharp yelp. The wolf whirled on her, its fury magnified. Its claws raked across her arm, tearing through her tunic and leaving a trail of searing pain. Despite the agony, she refused to yield. Diminutive, yes, and weaker than her opponent, but far from helpless. She ducked beneath another blow, using her litheness to her advantage. She weaved around the wolf, disrupting its balance, searching for an opening. Witnessing her peril, Riven roared, a sound born of pure rage. He dispatched his current opponent and surged toward her, a black thunderbolt of muscle and fang. He collided with the shadow wolf attacking Elara, sending it sprawling. He turned to her, his eyes alive with concern. "Elara, what are you doing? I told you to stay back. I couldn't just watch," she countered, her voice unsteady. "This is my home now, too." Riven's features softened, a hint of something akin to pride. He brushed his muzzle against her briefly before returning to the fray, his rage renewed. "Stay close," he rumbled, "and be wary." Together, they became a tempest of black fur and unyielding will against the shadow wolf's relentless assault. Emboldened by Riven's proximity, Elara fought with an unprecedented intensity. Her strength was no match for the werewolves, but her speed, agility, and resourcefulness were. She targeted the wolves' vulnerable points with her dagger, creating diversions and affording Riven the openings he needed to deliver lethal blows. The momentum began to shift. Driven by Riven's command and Elara's unexpected valor, the Blackwood pack rallied. The invaders, sensing defeat, began to fall back, dissolving into the shadows from whence they came. As the last of the shadow wolves vanished into the trees, an uneasy calm descended upon the battleground. The Blackwood pack stood victorious, though weary, their fur slicked with gore and grime. The air was thick with the heavy odor of mortality. Riven shifted back, his body bearing the marks of battle, but his eyes still smoldering with primal fire. He surveyed the field, his gaze lingering on the fallen. A mournful cry escaped his lips, a lament for the slain. Turning to Elara, his expression softened. He reached out, his fingers tracing the wound inflicted by the shadow wolf. "You're injured," he stated, his voice laced with worry. "It's nothing," she dismissed, waving away his concern. "Just a scratch." He saw through her bravado, but refrained from pressing. He knew she sought to appear resilient. He drew her close, holding her tightly. "You were courageous," he murmured into her hair. "Beyond anything I had hoped for." His words warmed her, easing the lingering fear. She had faced death and survived. She had fought for her pack, her haven, and, at least in Riven's eyes, proven her worth. Standing amidst the battlefield's carnage, Elara knew this conflict was far from resolved. The shadow wolves would inevitably return. And when that day came, she would be prepared. She was no longer just a piece in Riven's design. She was a warrior, a guardian, a Blackwood pack member, and she would fight for her place until her final breath. The dying embers of battle flickered, casting long, grotesque shadows across the gate, a grim reminder of the darkness lurking just beyond their borders. The pack's savior, the clangor of battle, still vibrated in Elara's bones as she cast a critical eye over the ravaged training grounds. The shadow wolves had vanished, but the chilling imprint of their savagery lingered. Inwardly, she braced herself their respite would be brief. Riven's urgent directive to fortify Blackwood Keep echoed in her thoughts. A daunting prospect, yet Elara knew she possessed a singular advantage, an intimate knowledge of the Keep's secrets, the clandestine routes, the forgotten chambers, the strategic vulnerabilities gleaned from her years as a servant within its walls. "Tauren," she called, approaching the brawny warrior, his voice a gravelly roar as he commanded a contingent of pack warriors. He halted, his face a mask of suspicion and disdain. "There are better methods to defend the keep, hidden ways, secret caches." Tauren spat, wiping crimson from a laceration on his forearm. "And you'd be privy to such things, would you, traitor's spawn?" His words, dripping with venom, revived the old, festering accusations leveled against her family. Elara met his gaze unflinchingly, refusing to yield. "My parents stood accused, yes, but I was raised within these very walls. I know its architecture as well as I know my own heartbeat. Utilize my knowledge, or dismiss it, but don't let your prejudice become our downfall." A flicker of uncertainty briefly clouded Tauren's features. He surveyed the weary countenances of the pack, their wounds a stark testament to the shadow wolves' brutal assault. He grunted, a sound like stones grinding together. "All right, Meadowsweet, take the lead. But mark my words, if this is treachery." Elara disregarded the veiled threat, turning towards the keep. "Behind the library hearth, there's a passage," she stated, her tone firm and assured. "It opens onto a network of tunnels that intersect with the outer defenses. We can use them to outmaneuver the enemy, create distractions." Tauren hesitated, then signaled a knot of warriors to follow Elara. As they traversed the keep, Elara identified concealed entrances, clandestine armories, and strategically placed arrow loops. Initial skepticism gave way to astonished, grudging respect among the pack. Within the library, Elara's fingers traced the carvings on the ornate fireplace, locating a recessed lever. With a soft click, a section of the wall pivoted inward, revealing a narrow, dust-choked passage. Tauren's eyes widened. "Incrementally. Resourceful?" He mumbled, the word wrenched from him. The tunnels were confining and lightless, the air thick with the musty odor of decay. Elara, however, moved with unwavering assurance, her hand gliding over the cold, rough stone as she led the pack through the subterranean maze. They re-emerged behind a section of the outer wall, overlooking a precipitous ravine. From here, archers can unleash a rain of fire on any who attempt to scale the wall, Elara pointed out, indicating a series of carefully positioned arrow slits. And should they breach the gate, the tunnels grant us the means to strike from the rear. Torin studied the vantage point, his expression pensive. Ingenious, he conceded. Very well, position archers here. Ensure they have unobstructed fields of fire. Turning back to Elara, a nascent hint of gratitude flickered in his eyes. Where else? For hours, Elara labored tirelessly, guiding the warriors through the keep's intricate network of secret passages, reinforcing vulnerable points, and establishing defensive perimeters. She demonstrated how to exploit the environment to their advantage, transforming familiar architecture into a lethal instrument. As the sun dipped below the horizon, draping long shadows across the grounds, Elara stood on the battlements, surveying the fortified keep. The air hummed with anticipation, the silence punctuated only by the rustle of leaves and the distant keen of a wolf. She knew the shadow wolves would return, it was simply a question of when. Torin approached, his face a study in grim determination. They're coming, he said, his voice a low rumble. Scouts report they're massing in the forest. Elara nodded, her pulse quickening. Then let's meet them prepared, she said, her voice unwavering. We hold the advantage now. We understand their tactics. We recognize their vulnerabilities, and we know this keep better than they ever will. Under the mantle of darkness, the shadow wolves launched their assault, their movements fluid and silent. They surged against the gates, their claws tearing at the reinforced barricades. But the Blackwood pack was prepared. Archers unleashed volleys of arrows from the ramparts, while warriors clashed with savage tenacity on the ground. Elara, armed with sword and shield, weaved through the pandemonium, directing warriors, bolstering their courage, and exploiting the keep's secret passages to outflank the enemy. Using her knowledge of the tunnels, she led small strike teams behind the Shadow Wolves' lines, disrupting their advances and sowing discord. At one critical moment, a contingent of Shadow Wolves managed to breach the main gate, flooding into the courtyard. Recognizing the dire threat, Elara rallied a group of warriors and led them through a hidden passage that opened directly behind the invaders. The unexpected assault caught the Shadow Wolves completely by surprise, shifting the momentum of the battle. Torin, fighting alongside Elara, watched in astonishment as she moved with sinuous grace and deadly precision, her sword a silver flash in the moonlight. He saw her anticipate the enemy's actions, exploit their weaknesses, and ignite her fellow warriors with her bravery and resolve. He understood, with sudden clarity, that Elara Meadowsweet was not the traitor's daughter he had assumed her to be. She was a warrior born, a cunning tactician, and an invaluable asset to the Blackwood pack. As the battle reached its fever pitch, Elara found herself face to face with the Shadow Wolf Alpha, a hulking figure whose eyes blazed with malevolent intent. He lunged, claws extended, but Elara evaded the attack with a swift sidestep, retaliating with a precise thrust of her blade. The Alpha snarled, rage contorting his features. They fought with unrestrained ferocity, their movements a dizzying dance of steel and shadow. Despite her smaller frame, Elara held her ground against the Alpha, leveraging her agility and intimate knowledge of the keep to her advantage. She drew him into the labyrinthine corridors, baiting him into a deadly trap. As the Alpha pursued her through a narrow passage, Elara activated a hidden mechanism, triggering a collapse of the ceiling. The Alpha was ensnared beneath the falling debris, stunned and disoriented. Elara seized the opportunity, plunging her sword into his heart. With the Alpha vanquished, the Shadow Wolves' attack crumbled. Their morale shattered, they began a disorganized retreat. The Blackwood pack, emboldened by their triumph, pursued them relentlessly, driving them back into the depths of the forest. As the last of the shadow wolves melted into the shadows, Elara stood in the courtyard, her body throbbing with exhaustion, her clothes ripped and stained with blood. Yet she felt a profound sense of fulfillment, a hard-earned sense of accomplishment. She had defended the Blackwood pack, and in doing so, had begun to earn their trust, their respect, and perhaps even their allegiance. Torin approached, his expression inscrutable. "You fought with valor, Meadowsweet," he said, his voice laced with grudging admiration. "You saved us this night." Elara nodded, accepting his acknowledgement without arrogance. "I did what was necessary," she replied simply. Torin hesitated, then extended his hand. "Perhaps," he said, "we were too quick to judge you." Elara clasped his hand, her grip firm. "Perhaps," she replied. "But the war is far from over, Torin. Unity is our only path to survival." As they stood bathed in the ethereal glow of the moon, Elara knew that she had taken the first, crucial step towards reclaiming her family's honor and finding her rightful place within the Blackwood pack. She was no longer merely the traitor's daughter, forever burdened by suspicion. She was a warrior, a protector, potentially a savior. Betrayal revealed Elara felt the chill of Blackwood keep settled deep in her bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the stone walls and everything to do with the lingering echoes of the Shadow Wolves' attack. The victory felt hollow, stained by the knowledge that they'd been so easily infiltrated, and the nagging suspicion that plagued her since she'd seen Kale's too calm demeanor after it all. She found herself drawn back to the hidden passages, not to reinforce them, but to understand them, to dissect them until they yielded every last secret. It was in a small, forgotten alcove behind the kitchens, masked by a loose tapestry depicting a long-dead Blackwood alpha, that she found it. A small, tightly rolled parchment, sealed with a broken signet ring, the very same design she'd seen on Kale's pinky finger. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she unfurled the brittle parchment. The ink was faded, but the message craft was clear. A crude map of the keep, highlighting the very passages the Shadow Wolves had used, along with a time and date, aligning perfectly with the night of the attack. The message ended with a single, chilling phrase: "The pack will be stronger under new leadership." A wave of nausea washed over Elara. Kale, he had orchestrated it all, used her knowledge of the keep against them, all for a grab at power. Lyra Whitestone found her there, kneeling in the dust, the parchment clutched in her trembling hand. The pack caregiver, always a source of calm in the chaotic hall. World of Blackwood was preparing to depart, answering a plea for aid from the Silver Creek pack, ravaged by a strange illness. "Elara? What is it? You look as though you've seen a ghost." Lyra's voice was gentle, laced with concern. Elara swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet Lyra's gaze. I think Kale betrayed us, Lyra. He helped the Shadow Wolves." Lyra's brow furrowed. "Kale? That's a serious accusation, Elara. What makes you say that?" Elara extended the parchment towards her. "I found this hidden in the keep. It's a map detailing the passages they used, and the signet it matches Kale's ring." Lyra took the parchment, her expression hardening as she studied it. "This is disturbing. But a signet ring can be copied, Elara. We need more than this to make such an accusation." "I know," Elara said, her voice tight with urgency. "But think about it, Lyra. He was so quick to dismiss my warnings about the keep's vulnerabilities. He seemed almost relieved when the attack happened. and he's been subtly undermining me since I arrived, stirring up dissent among the warriors. Lyra sighed, running a hand through her silver-streaked hair. I've noticed the tension, but I attributed it to the pack's adjustment to your presence. You are, after all, daughter of, well, you know. I know, Elara said, the old wound of her parents' betrayal throbbing anew. But this isn't about my parents, Lyra. This is about Kale. He wants to be alpha. He's willing to sacrifice anyone to get there. Lyra looked at Elara, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and understanding. I trust your instincts, Elara. You've proven yourself to be more than just a Meadowsweet. But we need irrefutable proof, something that will convince Riven and the rest of the pack. Then I'll find it, Elara vowed, a steely determination hardening her gaze. I'll expose him, Lyra, before he can cause any more harm. Lyra squeezed Elara's hand. Be careful, Elara. Kale is cunning, and he has allies within the pack. Don't trust anyone implicitly, except perhaps Riven. Riven? Elara echoed, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name passing through her. Trusting Riven was a complicated matter. He had saved her, claimed her, but he was still an enigma, a powerful, unpredictable force. He may be difficult, Lyra said, reading the doubt in Elara's eyes. But he is fiercely loyal to the pack, and he values strength and loyalty above all else. If you can prove Kale's treachery, Riven will act. Elara nodded, steeling herself. I understand. And Lyra, thank you for believing me. Lyra smiled sadly. I always believed there was more to you than met the eye, Elara. Now go, find your proof, and be safe. With Lyra's words echoing in her ears, Elara set about gathering evidence. She started with Kale's quarters, searching for anything that could corroborate the map or reveal his connections to the Shadow Wolves. She knew she was taking a risk, trespassing in the second-in-command's personal space, but she had no other choice. The room was Spartan, meticulously organized, reflecting Kale's cold, calculating nature. There were no personal touches, no signs of warmth or vulnerability, just rows of neatly arranged books, polished weapons, and a meticulously made bed. Elara searched for hours, meticulously combing through every drawer, every shelf, every hidden corner. She found nothing incriminating, nothing that directly linked Kale to the Shadow Wolves. Just the chilling emptiness of a man who valued power above all else. Just as despair began to creep in, she noticed something odd about the rug in front of Kale's fireplace. It was slightly askew, as if it had been recently moved. With a surge of adrenaline, she knelt down and lifted the edge of the rug, revealing a loose floorboard. Beneath the floorboard, she found a small, wooden box. Her hands trembling, she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single, intricately carved wolf's tooth. It was a brass Shadow Wolf totem, a symbol of allegiance to their pack. But that wasn't all. Beneath the totem, she found another piece of parchment, this one written in a different hand, a hasty scrawl that reeked of desperation. It was a letter, addressed to Kale, from a shadow wolf named Varg. The letter detailed the terms of their agreement, promising Kale leadership of the Blackwood pack in exchange for allowing the Shadow Wolves access to the keep. It also mentioned a payment, large sum of silver, to be delivered after the attack. Elara's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the irrefutable proof she needed. Kale's treachery was laid bare, in black and white. But as she reached for the letter, a shadow fell across the room. She turned to see Kale standing in the doorway, his eyes narrowed, his face a mask of cold fury. "Looking for something, Elara?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Perhaps something you shouldn't have found?" Alpha's Justice Kale's fingers, a steel trap, encircled Elara's wrist. "You've seen nothing," he breathed, the words a foul draught on her skin. "Understand? Not a single thing." The air thrummed with his barely leashed rage, a tempest simmering in his eyes. Elara wrenched free, the purloined totem biting into her palm. "The pack has a right to know, Kale. Your version of it, at least." She brandished the shadow wolf carving, its rough contours a blatant accusation. "This the missive. It all implicates you." He surged forward, but she danced aside, a jolt of adrenaline sharpening her senses. She had to reach Riven, the heart of the pack. Bursting from the stifling cabin, she bolted toward the training grounds, the clamor of warriors a discordant symphony in the gloaming. "Kale's a turncoat," she bellowed, her voice cracking, yet slicing through the twilight calm. Every head swiveled, a gallery of shocked, hostile faces. Riven stood sentinel at the center, his imposing figure a beacon of authority, his gaze inscrutable, locked onto Elara. Lyra elbowed her way through the throng, her features creased with worry. Kale emerged from the cabin doorway, his expression a carefully constructed mask of innocence. "She's fabricating." Another ploy for attention, for status. He gesticulated wildly at Elara. "She's a Meadowsweet, a serpent in our den. Will you credit her lies over my unwavering loyalty?" Disregarding him, Elara fixed on Riven. "I have evidence, Riven. He's been corresponding with the Shadow Wolves, offering them safe passage across our lands in return for influence." She presented the totem and the crumpled letter. A ripple of murmurs coursed through the pack ranks. Doubt, an insidious poison, began to infect their trust in Kale. Riven advanced, his focus laser-locked on the items in Elara's grasp. He snatched the totem, examining it with a deliberate, unnerving slowness, his nostrils widening. Then he unfolded the letter, his jaw clenching as his eyes scanned the incriminating text. "This is a fabrication," Kale thundered, desperation coloring his tone. "A plant! She's trying to tear us asunder." Riven's gaze lifted, his eyes glacial. "Is it, Kale?" His voice, a low growl, vibrated with suppressed fury. "Is it truly?" He flicked the letter toward Lyra. "Authenticate the script." Lyra caught the offered paper, her brow furrowing. A swift examination brought comprehension, her eyes expanding as recognition dawned. "It's his," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The handwriting undeniably Kale's own. The murmur erupted into a volcanic roar. Accusations flew like poisoned darts. Disbelief locked in mortal combat with outraged betrayal. All eyes bore into Kale, the burden of their collective judgment threatening to crush him. Riven closed the distance, his shadow swallowing Kale. "You violated your oath, your alpha. For what? A scintilla of power." Kale's pretense dissolved, revealing the raw ugliness underneath. He snarled, his eyes burning with feral intensity. "You wouldn't grasp it. You were born to power. I deserved it more. I was always stronger, quicker." "Strength isn't merely physical, Kale," Riven countered, his voice dripping with disdain. "It's about allegiance, safeguarding those you were sworn to protect. You failed that oath. You are a disgrace." "I challenge you, Riven," Kale roared, his body trembling violently. "A duel to the death. For the leadership." A collective gasp silenced the crowd. To challenge an alpha was an act of treason, the transgression punishable by immediate termination. But Kale had offered Riven no alternative. Riven's lips curved into a predatory smile. "You desire a fight, Kale? You shall have it, but not for my position. It will be for your treachery, for the stain you've left on this pack." He transformed, bones grinding and reshaping as he assumed his wolf form. An immense, obsidian predator, muscles coiling beneath his lustrous fur, towered over Kale. Kale followed, shifting into a formidable gray wolf, though a smaller, less imposing version of Riven's terrifying display. The ensuing battle was savage, a blur of fangs and claws. Riven moved with a blinding speed and ferocity Kale couldn't hope to match. He evaded Kale's clumsy strikes, retaliating with devastating force. The air vibrated with guttural growls, savage snarls, and the sickening impact of bodies colliding with the earth. Kale fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, fueled by rage and a forlorn hope for survival. But Riven was relentless, each movement precise, each blow measured, his power absolute. He fought for the honor of the pack, for the deep violation Kale had perpetrated against them. Finally, Riven slammed Kale to the ground, his teeth bared, ready to administer the coup de grace. Kale whined, his eyes wide with primal terror. But Riven hesitated, his gaze swept the pack, their faces a tableau of hatred and expectancy. He detected the bloodlust in their eyes, the craving for retribution. Yet he also perceived something else. A bone-deep weariness, a yearning for tranquility. He lifted his head and unleashed a howl, a prolonged, mournful lament that resonated through the forest depths. Then he released Kale, stepping back, granting him the freedom to rise. To rise. "I will not end you, Kale," Riven proclaimed, his voice amplified by his wolf form. "But you are exiled from the Blackwood pack. You are no longer one of us. Depart now and never return. If you dare show your face again, I will show no pity." Kale, wounded and beaten, his fur slick with blood, hobbled away, vanishing into the sheltering shadows of the forest. The pack regarded him as he left, their silence weighed down by the enormity of his betrayal. Riven reverted to his human form, his body battered and bruised, but his eyes unwavering. He turned toward Elara, his expression softening. He strode toward her, ignoring the cautious glances of the pack members. "You executed what had to be done," he said, his voice raspy with emotion. "It demanded courage, and you met the need." He reached out and clasped her hand, his touch sending a pulse of awareness through her. He raised his voice, addressing the assembled pack. Elara exposed Kale's treachery. She acted in the best interests of the Blackwood pack, risking her life to safeguard us all. He tightened his grip on her hand, his gaze unwavering. "She is under my protection, and I will not brook any further antagonism toward her." The pack remained muted, their faces still etched with suspicion. But Riven's words had the power of edict, his authority absolute. He had spoken, and they would obey. Elara understood this was not the culmination of her trials within the Blackwood clan, but a commencement, an opening to demonstrate her loyalty, to earn their trust, to finally discover her rightful place. That night, in Riven's bed, Elara couldn't dispel the image of Kale's devastated features. In spite of everything, a sliver of empathy pierced her. He had been driven by a hunger, consumed by a burning for power. Ultimately, he had forfeited everything. She recognized that ravenous craving, that desperation. But she knew, with a certainty that resonated in her very soul, that she would never betray the pack, never betray Riven. Her redemption lay entwined with them, woven into the essence of the Blackwood territory, bound to the destiny of the Alpha who had claimed her. Legacy of truth. A palpable tension hung in the Blackwood pack hall, the air heavy with a primal unease that prickled the skin. Elara stood before them, a solitary scroll her only defense against their collective doubt. Weeks of relentless investigation, broken codes, and furtive exchanges with a handful of confidants had led to this moment. Her pulse throbbed in her ears, a frantic counterpoint to the expectant hush. Near the back, Torin Greymark, still marked by the recent fray, observed her with folded arms and a skeptical gaze. Lyra Whitestone, pack already readied for her journey to Silver Creek, offered a subtle, encouraging nod. "I know suspicion lingers," Elara stated, her voice surprisingly firm despite the turmoil within. "Suspicion regarding my lineage, my motives, the events that have brought us to this precipice." She unfurled the scroll, the ancient parchment rustling like autumn leaves underfoot. "This is a record, not penned by the Meadowsweets, but by the keepers of the Luna Stone. Within lies the true purpose of the artifact and the role my parents played in its disappearance." A ripple of unrest spread through the assembled wolves. Riven, a steadfast presence at her side, raised a hand, silencing them with a glare that promised swift consequences for any interruption. Elara continued, her voice gaining resonance as she revealed the scroll's secrets. "The Luna Stone was never simply a power source. It was a key, unlocking a sealed chamber beneath our ancestral lands. Within resided not a weapon, nor inexhaustible energy, but a prison." She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to settle. "A prison containing something ancient, something perilous, that, if unleashed, would have consumed everything we hold dear." Torin scoffed, his voice a harsh rasp. "A subterranean prison and primeval evil? Sounds like a pup's bedtime story, Meadowsweet." Elara met his challenge head-on. "My parents didn't steal the Luna Stone, Torin. They concealed it, safeguarding us all. They followed the Keeper's instructions, ensuring it remained beyond the reach of those seeking to awaken the darkness confined within." She indicated intricate symbols etched into the parchment. "These are part of a complex locking mechanism, one my parents re-engaged after relocating the stone. They sacrificed their standing, their very lives, to secure that prison." Lyra stepped forward, concern etched on her features. "But why the secrecy? Why not confide in someone?" "The Keepers believed knowledge of the prison itself would draw those with malicious intent," Elara explained. "They chose my parents for their strength, loyalty, and discretion. They charged them with an oath of silence, knowing the immensity of the burden." And immense it was. Elara glanced at Riven, conveying a silent appeal. He nodded, understanding bridging the unspoken. He too knew the burden of leadership, the weight of secrets carried for the greater good. "My parents were not traitors," Elara declared, her voice ringing with newfound conviction. "They were heroes. Protectors of the Blackwood pack." A profound silence ensued, broken only by the fire's crackle in the hearth. Slowly, tentatively, heads began to nod. Doubts morphed into murmurs of comprehension. The truth, concealed for so long, had finally surfaced. Torin, his face a study in conflicting emotions, stepped forward, his voice laced with humility. "If this is true, I owe your parents a debt of apology. And you, Elara." He inclined his head, a gesture of respect that sent ripples through the pack. Others followed suit, offering their own amends, their acknowledgments of the revealed truth. A wave of relief washed over Elara, almost buckling her knees. The shadow over her family name was at last beginning to lift. Their sacrifice had not been for naught. Riven's hand on her shoulder grounded her. "The past is behind us," he said, his voice resonating with authority. "But we must learn from it. We honor those who came before by forging a future of trust and shared understanding." He addressed the pack, his gaze sweeping across their faces. "Elara has revealed the truth. She has proven her devotion, her courage, her unwavering commitment to the Blackwood pack. From this day forward she will stand beside me, not only as my claimed, but as a leader, a voice of counsel, a beacon of hope." He turned back to Elara, his eyes reflecting an emotion she couldn't fully name but knew, instinctively, was profound. "Together," he said, his voice softening, "we will guide this pack toward a future of peace and harmony." Elara met his gaze, her heart swelling with gratitude, and something more. Something that resonated with the wild spirit within, the wolf awakened by his bite. She saw not just an alpha, but a partner, a protector, a kindred soul. Lyra approached, a wistful smile gracing her features. "I must depart now," she said, regret lacing her tone. "But I leave knowing the Blackwood pack is in capable hands. Both of yours." She embraced Elara warmly. "Take care of him," she whispered, glancing at Riven. "He needs you more than he lets on." Elara nodded, her throat tight. "I will," she promised. As Lyra left, Elara turned back to the pack, her hand clasped in Riven's. His strength flowed into her, bolstering her resolve. The path ahead would be challenging. There would be trials and enemies yet to overcome. But they would face them together. "We have much work ahead," Elara said, her voice clear and resonant. "We must rebuild our trust, fortify our bonds, and prepare for whatever the future unveils." She looked at Riven, her eyes bright with determination. "But we will do it together, as one pack, bound by loyalty, driven by truth, and guided by the legacy of those who preceded us." Riven squeezed her hand, his golden eyes burning with pride. He had found not only a mate, but a partner, a woman who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him, challenge him, and inspire him to be a better alpha. He had saved her from death, but she, in turn, had saved him from himself. He raised their joined hands, a silent declaration of their bond, their commitment to the pack. The wolves roared their approval, their voices reverberating through the hall, a powerful testament to the truth's liberating force, unity's strength, and the Blackwood pack's enduring spirit. The lingering scent of fear and suspicion began to fade, replaced by the grounding aroma of renewed hope and the promise of a more radiant future. Elara knew their journey had only just begun, but standing beside Riven, bathed in the warmth of the pack's acceptance, she felt a sense of belonging she had never known. She was home. She was where she was meant to be, and she was ready to face whatever lay ahead, with Riven as her anchor. The Luna Stone remained hidden, but the legacy of her parents, the legacy of truth, was now revealed, ready to guide, to protect, and to flourish.